the 9/11 Commission staff, and he mentions that he will swear on his entire life career that he identified Muhammad Atta in January of 2000, and that his team had a chart with Muhammad Atta's name on it and face on it, but also that he saw that chart over and over again. It wasn't a one-time glance. And he also told Dieter Snell that they tried to transfer that information to the FBI. This was Dieter Snell's response, quote, "What do you want us to do with this information? We go to print in 10 days, end quote.
And one other interesting note, Tom, we've also learned at NBC that there was a President Bush in the White House during the morning of these events. His father, former President Bush, was actually at the White House the morning of the attack.
The bin Laden family are in the Carlyle Group and were meeting on the morning of 9/11 discussing the coming year's financial ventures. Bush Sr., another chairman at Carlyle, was meeting with bin Laden's father and brother, where both of them were to be intimately affected by the day's outcome on completely opposite sides of the spectrum. Carlyle is a defense contracting firm, so they both conveniently would be profiting from the war resulting in the attacks that they were witnessing take place on television. While Americans couldn't fly, the bin Ladens were flown out of the country.
One more story. Yesterday, in the first couple of hours of this, when all American, all U.S. air carriers were ordered to land at the nearest airport, this was taken very seriously. One of our photographers noticed a military jet trailing closely a civilian airliner in the vicinity of Washington, D.C. He was in Arlington at the time. By the time he swung his camera up, it was out of frame, so we have only 2 or 3 seconds of video of it. But this was taken very seriously yesterday.
To ensure safe passage back to Saudi Arabia, the bin Ladens were flown out of the country with military escorts for protection without answering any questions by investigators. Protected on their aerial evasion from U.S. authorities by U.S. military, while all planes were grounded in the United States, to which even high-ranking U.S. officials could not travel, the bin Ladens were allowed to fly.
How did Osama bin Laden's family flee America? Let's go to CNN's Brian Todd. Brian?
Wolf, in those frightful days after 9/11, U.S. intelligence dealt with a fog of information, and these newly released documents seem to add to the confusion. More than a week after the attacks, a couple of days after more than 100 Saudi nationals, including members of Osama bin Laden's family, are flown out of the U.S. on chartered flights, an FBI document mentions one of the flights. Quote, "The plane was chartered either by the Saudi Arabian royal family or Osama bin Laden." The plane in question left on September 19th. The FBI document was written on September 21st. Was the FBI still not sure if bin Laden was involved in arranging a flight carrying his family members even after it had left?
You may recall that the bin Laden family, some of them were here in the Orlando area, and now more on how they got out of the country. Bob.
That's right, Claire. We've already taken a look at some parts of this report, and on pages 329 and 330, they deal directly with the issue of whether the members of the bin Laden family were given preferential treatment to flee Orlando and other cities without the proper scrutiny. Let's show you some video that was taken exclusively by News Channel 2 8 days after 9/11. That man there is Osama bin Laden's younger brother Khalil, who had been here vacationing with other family members there on an estate that they owned in West Orange County. Now,
but I feel, frankly, abandoned. If I question anything about the official story, I'm called a conspiracy theorist. When the first news reporter from my local area in upstate New York came to tell me she was going to allow me to tell a beautiful story of my daughter, all I asked that day was, why could I not fly home from Toronto? But Osama bin Laden's family and some Saudi nationals whose names I still don't know were flown out of the country in our airspace. I was grounded. They were not.
According to the former chief consular officer in Saudi Arabia who blew the whistle on the joint CIA-Al-Qaeda visa fraud scandal that took place while he was there, J. Michael Springman, worked for the United States government for 20 years with the Foreign Service and Consulate. He claimed that the CIA was overriding visa decisions made in Saudi Arabia and protecting al-Qaeda operatives in getting them to the United States to be trained and have returned for covert programs in the Middle East.
I began with the federal government in 1969, taking a job in the Bureau of International Commerce at the U.S. Department of Commerce. While I was there, I had been working my way through the International Trade Administration, doing some trade show promotions, and got myself assigned to Stuttgart as a commercial officer in the State Department's State Commerce Exchange Program. Went on to India as the first Foreign Commercial Service officer, and then got into the real State Department, and as a reward got sent to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where I was chief of the non-immigrant visa section. I had discovered what I thought was visa fraud, and it wasn't until I was out of the Foreign Service who ran into Joe Trento, the journalist, plus a couple of other people. One worked for the government, one worked for a local university. They told me that what I was questioning was not visa fraud, but a program to recruit terrorists for the Afghan war. And when I protested this to people in Jeddah, to the consulate, to the embassy, and to the Bureau of Consular Affairs in Washington, I was met with total indifference, despite the fact that the punishment for visa fraud is something like 10 years in jail and a fine of $250,000.
15 of the hijackers were in the United States on visas obtained from a program in Saudi Arabia. Only 3 of them were interviewed by a consular official. The Visas Express program started in June 2001 and allowed visas to be given automatically without interviews or background checks. The program was initiated only in Saudi Arabia, which is a nation known to have a large population of animosity towards the United States, which is sympathetic to the nation's own native, Osama bin Laden. This visa program was only introduced in Saudi Arabia, while no other such privilege was or has ever been extended to any of the allies or Western European friends of the United States. Michael Springman blew the whistle and stated that State Department officials were issuing visas to terrorists, which he knew were terrorists, but he was being gagged.
The 19 hijackers were able to get into the United States despite information on their travel documents that should have raised some big red flags. Could it happen again? Here's NBC Justice Department correspondent Pete Williams.
It's a myth, the report says, that all the 19 hijackers entered the U.S. legally. Some clearly did, like hijacker leader Mohammed Atta, whose actual visa is shown publicly for the first time. But 3 of the hijackers on board the plane that crashed into the Pentagon had on their visa applications what the report calls indicators of Islamic extremism linked to al-Qaeda. The 3 were Khalid al-Midar, Salem al-Hazmi, whose state-issued ID cards are shown here, and al-Hazmi's brother Nawaf. Of the actual hijacker passports, only this burned fragment of Ziad Jarrah's is shown, recovered from the wreckage of Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania. But the report says when 2 other hijackers applied for their visas, their documents contained another warning sign: phony travel stamps intended to cover up their travel to Afghanistan to attend terror training camps.
Even though there'd been the bombings in 95, 96, 98, 2000, all involving Saudis, no one asked for a national intelligence estimate if Saudi Arabia is a new terrorist state.
In April of 2000, Nayaz Khan, a British citizen originally from Pakistan, was recruited by al-Qaeda.
It was over a year before 9/11, a Pakistani-British man told the FBI an incredible tale, that he'd been trained by followers of Osama bin Laden to hijack airplanes, and he confessed he was now in America to carry out an attack.
After gambling away money sent to him for flight training, and afraid al-Qaeda would come after him for betrayal, he turned himself into the FBI. He detailed the plot to fly a hijacked plane into the World Trade Center, in which he was a part. This was April of 2000. A member of the attacks turned himself in and confessed to the attacks. He also disclosed that other agents were inside the United States.
Khan tells NBC News that for the next few weeks, he was trained by al-Qaeda to hijack passenger planes and sent to the U.S. But when he told the FBI